Next up, Steve, we go down to the Frisco Bowl. It's the Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl down in Frisco, Texas. Marshall and Texas San Antonio, the Roadrunners, are a big 13-point favorite.
Yeah, and of course, Frisco's where the 1AA, the FCS championship, takes place now. And of course, back before they played it here, Marshall, I believe, actually hosted it a few times in Huntington, West Virginia. And they, of course, were a 1AA power back in the 90s before making the bump here in the last decade or so. UTSA, also a team that recently bumped up. So you think these are two teams, for the most part, that would be excited about bowl season. And an angle we pointed out in some of the earlier games from my colleague Ralph Michaels at wagertalk.com is that just blindly playing on these 6-win bowl teams versus teams that won 7 or more has made you money over the last decade, and the logic makes a lot of sense. A 6-6 team barely got in the bowls like Marshall. They had to win their final game against Arkansas State after losing 28-0 to South Alabama. It was a must-win situation, so they're happy to be here. Meanwhile, Texas San Antonio was 7-4. They dropped their final game to fall to 7-5. But I don't want, or actually, I'm sorry, they were 8-3, dropped their final game to fall to 8-4. So you could make an argument maybe they had bigger bowl aspirations, but I don't think that was necessarily the case. And they get to somewhat stay in their home state here. So I think it's kind of a wash. It is a big favorite, though, like you said, UTSA laying nearly 2 touchdowns. And a lot of it has to do, of course, with the transfer portal, who's sitting in, who's sitting out. We're doing this about a week out here, but from what I'm seeing right now is a starting quarterback for Marshall into the transfer portal. Cole Pennington will now be the starter, and also lost a wide receiver, also lost the center guard, their anchor of the offensive line. So a lot of parts are missing on the offensive side for Marshall. And I think that's why we've seen UTSA go is almost a 2-touchdown favorite now. I mentioned the 6-6 angle, though, favoring Marshall. Another angle that works well in these early bowl games for decades now is really just blindly playing double-digit underdogs. And it makes a lot of sense because if these games are kind of random, if both teams are mediocre, you normally want to take the big points. So we'll see if this has been too much of a line move, but there are some technical situations favoring Marshall.
I've got a hunch. Cole Pennington, that name sounds familiar. I'm guessing that he is Chad Pennington's son playing quarterback at Marshall.
That's what I was thinking too. When I heard Pennington, that's the first thing I thought, and I'll have to look that up. But yeah, you got to figure there's some kind of not a coincidence, some kind of relation there.
So the last storyline you hit on in regards to a substantial line here, Steve, has anyone done any research? Because I would think, but this seems like too easy, that whether it's a more than touchdown underdog or a double-digit underdog during bowl play, just to blindly play those, it seems like it would pay off.
It will, and it has paid off for decades now. I've been doing this for 28 years. And it's a situation back in the 90s and 2000s when I started, I almost automatically played. It was 60-65% for some years there. The problem now, though, and the reason we have to take all of this kind of, as just a factor, just one of the many filters we use when handicapping bowl games, is because we're in uncharted territory now with this transfer portal, with people sitting out. I mean, they sit out playoff games now. Final Four playoff games guys will sit out. It's just insane, something you never thought we would see. So I think we have to be a little bit careful with the back testing and with the previous things that worked. But I will say this, Mark, one thing that has not changed, it's all about motivation. We don't have preseason in college football. We have preseason in the NFL, and I joke that handicapping the bowls more than ever is like handicapping the NFL preseason in August. It's all about motivation, and it's about who's playing quarterback and who else is in the lineup. And you can kind of dig deep. Where it gets tricky, though, is a guy like redshirt freshman Cole Pennington. We don't have a lot on him. And he is, by the way, the son, I looked it up, of the great Chad Pennington, as it says on the Marshall website. So, I think there's going to be a little bit of a spark. And I do think a lot of times these teams rally, just because they lose some of their key players, you can almost make an argument that rallies the troops a bit, and the other team somewhat overlooks them. So I think it's an angle that will continue to work to play big dogs.
All right, Steve, let's move it to Thursday, December 21st, and we go to Florida to the Boca Raton Bowl. This sponsored by roofclaim.com, a G5 versus Power 5 matchup. I would also love to see some history on those matchups, with typically a Power 5 playing down to a group of 5. In this case, not necessarily to a large degree, but Syracuse coming in at 6-6, of course, lost head coach Dino Babers at the end of the season. He was dismissed. South Florida reaching bowl play for the first time in several seasons.
Yeah, and they're going to have Camelia as the interim head coach. A&M's Elijah Robinson's been hired as the defensive coordinator, so we'll see how much of an impact that has here for Syracuse. And I think that's an interesting angle you're talking about, too, the mid-major teams versus the big boys. You would think there's motivation there. And I would have to guess if you just blindly looked at those games, the mid-major teams probably have covered more times than not. South Florida, Syracuse, both 6-6. Both Syracuse had to win. South Florida had to win their finales to get in. So you can make an argument they're probably both excited to be here because they were both on the outside looking in until the final week. Tough call here with the transition at Syracuse. We'll see what happens in this game. As far as the Wager Talk Live odds screen, we saw Syracuse open as high as -5.5, now down to 3. Obviously, 3 is a very key number. A lot of football games land exactly 3. And we have seen this total be bet up from 57.5 to 61, even some 61.5s now. And once again, these minor bowl games do have a tendency to be higher scoring than average. And this is actually one of the biggest totals for any of the minor bowl games. The one we're about to talk about next has even a bigger total, though. And most of the time, these games go over more times than not.
Steve Merrill joining us from Wager Talk TV. That can be found right here on YouTube. Take the deep dive, though. WagerTalk.com. Steve's selection on not just college football, the NFL, the NBA, and college basketball. And of course, as we get deeper into bowl season, we start to hit more of the prominent programs in the Power Five. We've got a matchup of a former G5 in UCF taking on Georgia Tech out of the ACC in the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl.
Yeah, and I mentioned high totals. This is one of the highest ones we have the first couple weeks of the bowl season, and should be a shootout here. 61.5 was the opener. Now it's up to 64.5, even some 65s out there. The early sharp money is definitely coming on the over in this game, and I think there's a couple reasons. First of all, it does appear that Georgia Tech's going to be without some key defensive players. Their edge rusher, Kyle Kennard, also a cornerback, Kenan Johnson, the two combined for over 1,000 snaps on the defensive side of the ball this year. So I do think there's a little bit of a weakness there for Georgia Tech. Meanwhile, UCF also lost a starting cornerback, Corey Thornton, 667 snaps this year. But they also lost some guys on offense, some role players, though. So it looks like both defenses a little bit weaker coming into this game, and I think that's one of the reasons we've seen some money coming on the over. We've also seen money come in on Georgia Tech. They opened a 6.5-point dog, now down to 4. And once again, a battle of 6-6 teams, should be a high-scoring game, very similar to that South Florida-Syracuse game, in which we've seen the money come in on the over and the underdog.
And similar matchup in a sense. Again, UCF elevating to the Power 5 this year, but Troy and Duke and the Birmingham Bowl. Of course, Mike Elko has taken off for Texas A&M, and Duke will go with Manny Diaz as its head coach in 2024. Again, one of the top G5 teams taking on a Duke team that finished at 7-5. Quarterback Riley Leonard has transferred to Notre Dame.
Right, and he obviously is a star quarterback. He's gone. Grayson Loftus most likely get the start. He played in 7 games because keep in mind Riley Leonard was injured with that ankle injury for a while there in the midseason. As you mentioned, the Duke coach has gone to A&M, but the Troy coach has also agreed to take a job at Tulane. So we have a situation with both teams have lame duck head coaches. The defensive coordinator for Troy, I believe, is going to step up as the interim head coach in this game. So we'll see how that plays out. Checking the Wager Talk Live odds screen, Troy opened 5.5. Now they're up to -8. I think some of that has to do with obviously the Duke coach, the Duke quarterback, all that other information coming out over the last week or two. Also, the total has not moved much at all, around 44.5 still, anywhere from 44 to 45 in that range. So on paper, it should be one of the lower scoring games. Duke was a strong defensive team this year, getting up just 19.5 points a game. Troy allowed just 17. But once again, these minor bowl games a lot of times have tendency to be higher scoring than the statistics would tell you. As far as motivation, Troy 11-2. You know, normally you see an 11-2 team playing an early December game. You think they wouldn't be too excited, but it's Birmingham, Alabama. It's going to be in their neck of the woods. And yes, Duke is only 7-5, but Duke was looking really good early in the season. They lost 3 of their final 5 straight up in ATS. Do kind of feel like the motivational edge goes to Troy here, but once again, a big line, -8 with the Troy team that would probably have been the underdog just a couple months ago.
All right, Steve, we will keep marching on through as we go to the Camelia Bowl that played in Birmingham, another one of those bowl games that has had several names throughout the years. Northern Illinois out of the MAC taking on Arkansas State of the Sun Belt.
Yeah, a little bit of an ugly matchup. 2 6-6 teams. Once again, you would think they're both excited to be here, especially Northern Illinois. This is a team that stood 4-6 into the last 2 games of the season, and they had to beat both Western Michigan and a terrible Kent State team. The only one-win team in all of Division 1A this year was Kent State. So once they got that 5th win against Western Michigan, they were probably feeling pretty good things about as a 3-touchdown favorite. They became bowl eligible. Arkansas State, meanwhile, lost 2 of their final 3, but still finished 6-6. From a motivation standpoint, I think it's pretty much a wash in this one. Let's check out the line movement on this game, though. As I check the Wager Talk Live odds screen, we see that this game opened briefly. Arkansas State is a 1.5-point favorite. Now they're -1 in most spots. I even see a pick 'em, so the lines come down a little bit towards Northern Illinois. Total open 52 up to 53.5 now in a lot of spots. So a little bit of money on Northern Illinois, a little bit of money on the over. And the overs usually cash in these type of minor bowl games between 2 mediocre teams.
All right. A downer of a November for the Air Force Academy. They were off to an 8-0 start. These are a couple teams actually that had, in a sense, New Year's Six aspirations. Of course, James Madison initially was not eligible to play in a bowl game at all. They had that waived. Of course, they went 11-1, but were undefeated late in the season before they tripped up against Appalachian State. And again, Air Force started 8-0, lost the final 4 games. We've got the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl with JMU taking on the Air Force Academy.
Yeah, really interesting matchup and storyline here. JMU, my neck of the woods here in Virginia, I really thought they were getting screwed over by not being bowl eligible. They were playing all Division 1A teams in their second season after transferring up as a power in the FCS level. Made a lot of noise, and they're allowed to play in a bowl game. Good for them. And then what happens? Boom, the head coach and half the coaching staff leaves before the bowl game. So it is kind of unfortunate. I don't blame Cignetti for taking the job at Indiana. He's taken half the staff with him. In fact, they hired, I believe, 5 interim coaches just to fill the staff here. The offensive line associate head coach is going to be the interim head coach for this game, acting head coach. Quarterback also, Jordan McLeod, is going to transfer. The good news, though, is he's going to play in this game, it looks like, and I think that's great because, boy, was it a bad optic to bitch and moan and complain and have the state legislator go to bat for you and then all of a sudden have your head coach and quarterback not play. So at least they've got their quarterback, and I think it makes the game a little more intriguing. Tough matchup, though. One angle that's worked for decades is to blindly play service academies in bowl games, and it works for a couple reasons. First of all, they're disciplined, right? The bowl games, it's all about motivation. You get the distractions and whatnot. Service academies travel pretty well. It's just in their nature. And also they run the triple option. And, that also is something that works well in bowl games because it's disciplined, keeps the ball on the ground. Now, JMU does have extra time to prepare for the triple option, which is a huge edge, normally having a full month, 4 weeks to prepare. But once again, they've lost half their coaching staff. Now, most of the coaching staff loss, though, was on the offensive side of the ball. So I think that's one interesting dynamic to point out in this game. As far as the total, it has dropped from 43 down to 41. 41 is actually a very key number. A lot of margins get you there, 24-17, 31-10, 21-20, for example. The line has also dropped. Madison was initially a 4-point favorite, now down to 2.5, so it's crossed below that key number of 3. So we've seen both the side and total kind of hover around key numbers here. I do think the setup is good for Air Force, but Madison had a great run defense this year. They gave up just 63 rushing yards a game, just 2.2 yards per rush. So on the surface, full month to prepare, good run defense. It looks like a good matchup for Madison. I just don't know what to make of the mindset. This is obviously a team at 11-1, wanted to make a bowl game. You would think they'd be hungry to play. But from the talk I've heard around the campus in Harrisonburg, there's a lot of disappointment with the head coach leaving. And at least the quarterback is going to play, even though he's transferring as well.
We continue to march through a full deck of bowl games on December 23rd. That's a Saturday, and one of my favorite naming conventions. This has been a long-standing bowl now, was once the Humanitarian Bowl up in Boise, Idaho. It's now, of course, and has been the famous Idaho Potato Bowl with Georgia State taking on Utah State on the blue carpet, Steve.
Yeah, and Boise sometimes would play in this game. We'd get Idaho. Maybe I don't know if Idaho ever played. They're, of course, at the FCS level now. They didn't have very good teams back in the FBS days. But I do think it's important to point out you've got a Utah State Aggies team that's used to the altitude. They're used to the cold weather and these conditions this time of year, playing a Georgia State team that's not used to it. So I think the altitude edge, even though it's not a home game for Utah State, it's going to feel like a home game. And that, as far as handicapping, we don't talk about altitude a lot with bowl games because most of them are not in cold weather areas. But like you said, the former Humanitarian Bowl, the famous Idaho Potato Bowl now, I think it does favor Utah State. And we've actually seen a good amount of money, at least a line move towards Utah State in this game. They opened as a 3.5-point dog Now they're a 1 to 1.5 point favorite, depending on where you look. Total has dropped from 63.5 down to 61.5. Should be a high-scoring game. A few reasons why. First of all, Georgia State hit pretty hard in the transfer portal. Their star running back, Marcus Carroll, is out. The backup running back is also transferring, so they're very thin in the backfield. Also losing their top wide receiver, their top offensive lineman. Also, a couple cornerbacks are out. So Georgia State got hit pretty hard. And from what I've seen a week out here, we got a week to go still, but Utah State's really reporting nobody transferring. So something about those Utah schools, Air Force and Utah State, no transfers. They like that weather. They like the altitude. They're staying there. Air Force, of course, in Colorado, Utah State, and Utah. But I meant to point that out in the Air Force analogy is that one thing about the military academies going forward, why I think that'll continue to work, that they do well in bowl games, they don't have any transfer portal guys. Those guys are there. So Utah State taking a page from Air Force. And I think the situational setup favors Utah State in this game.
Steve Merrill here as he drops by each and every week here at the Voice of College Football during college football season. Track him, though, throughout the year, NBA, college basketball, the NFL on Wager Talk. And also you can catch his show on Wager Talk TV right here on YouTube. Steve, I've given up trying to track these bowl games. I used to be a master at knowing all the bowl games and the connection to the dots and everything, but we had the earlier one in Montgomery, Alabama. Now we've got the one in Mobile, which I believe at one point was the GMAC Bowl, yes. And it's had a number of other iterations. But the 68 Ventures Bowl, South Alabama taking on Eastern Michigan. Wow. This at least opened, I don't know what the current line is, at 16.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing right now. We've seen very little movement. In fact, it opened 16. It's been 16. I think, once you get this price range, Mark, it kind of scares everybody off the game. These just aren't heavily bet games for that reason. And the fact there's numerous games on this Saturday, December the 23rd, I would venture to say that this will probably be one of the least bet games, although it is a 7 o'clock Eastern nighttime game. But the problem is South Alabama should win the game. They're more than 2 touchdowns better. Everybody knows that. But then again, big double-digit dogs historically have shown well in bowl games, and you can somewhat make a case for them for that reason. You do have to somewhat throw the stats out the window, but this is an Eastern Michigan team that really struggled to throw the ball this season, and they don't have backdoor cover potential for that reason. And South Alabama's weakness this year was their pass defense. It doesn't look like it's going to be a problem here against an Eastern Michigan team that just doesn't throw the ball well. Also, Eastern Michigan's starting quarterback, Austin Smith, is in the transfer portal. Their best edge rusher is out as well. South Alabama did lose a couple edge rushers also. So both defenses took a little bit of a hit. And this total is actually surprisingly dropped from 48.5 to 46.5. But once again, that's because Eastern Michigan won't have their quarterback. Tough call here. I don't like to go against double-digit dogs, but it's really difficult to make a case for Eastern Michigan. They're just not a good offensive team. They should be excited to be here. Back-to-back wins, by the way, just to become bowl eligible, including an upset win at Buffalo in the final game, which most people did not see happening. Meanwhile, South Alabama lost their final game, but they were already bowl eligible. Probably South Alabama is the only way to play it, although historically I'm not a big fan of laying 2.5 touchdowns.
We move on to the Las Vegas Bowl, SRS Distribution Las Vegas Bowl. And I got to say, Steve, if I'm running the matchups in my mind correctly, this is kind of historic in this way. This, I believe, with the Rose Bowl being a playoff game between Alabama and Michigan, is the final game between the Big Ten and the Pac-12, with the Pac-12 dissolving. Utah taking on Northwestern, as I believe everybody else I'm counting up in the Big Ten is playing SEC and Big 12 opponents, ACC opponents. So we've got Utah taking on Northwestern. This brings to mind a 2018 Holiday Bowl matchup between these two. Utah was a big favorite. They had a big lead, and Northwestern actually came back and won. And you talk about incentives, Steve. Northwestern was like projected to win 1 game, maybe 2 games this year. It's remarkable that they not only made bowl eligibility, but they were going into the final weekend already bowl eligible, beat Illinois, finished at 7-5.
Yeah, exactly. And red hot down the stretch, 4-1 straight up, but more importantly, 5-0 against the spread, a perfect 5-0 ATS record to finish the season. Utah, meanwhile, impressive year with the quarterback situation. They continue to win, play really good defense. But it looks like maybe they were starting to wear out down the stretch. They gave up 35 points or more in 3 of their final 5 games and went just 2-3 straight up in ATS. So it does appear to be 2 teams heading in opposite directions. And you got to wonder if Utah is really that excited about this game. As far as the transfer portal information goes, Northwestern, very few guys leaving at all. Only see a couple names on that list. So that also shows, I think, their focus for this game. Meanwhile, Utah, Nate Johnson's expected to enter the transfer portal, of course, having a disappointing season with injury. Bryson Barnes said he will play in the bowl game. We'll see if he leaves afterwards or not. They're missing some wide receivers. They're missing a couple cornerbacks. So, yeah, I can understand why this looks like a good focus spot for Northwestern. And with that said, you're still getting them as almost a touchdown dog. Now, the line was 8.5. It's come down to 6. But I think Northwestern definitely qualifies as a live dog in this game.
Steve, it is out to Hawaii for the Easy Post Hawaii Bowl. I ran some numbers the other day. Hawaii has been the selection of the Hawaii Bowl 8 of 19 years, but not this time around with San Jose State, a team that really came on late in the season in the Mountain West Conference, almost won the Mountain West, taking on Coastal Carolina.
Yeah, and as you know, I used San Jose State in that game against Fresno a few weeks ago for one of the many under-the-radar bets we've given out the last 2 years. I believe 20-5, 21-5. I've lost count. It's done
21, Steve.
Did I short myself? Is it 21?
Yes, you're up to 21-5.
I said 20-5 earlier on one of the other videos, so I'm glad you corrected me. I'll take the extra win. So yeah, great finish of the last 2 years combined, now 21-5. And one of the reasons that was my under the radar selection is because it was very contrarian. You know, Fresno started the season, what were they, 7-1? San Jose State was a slight favorite. It just didn't make a lot of sense. But that's because the betting markets had not caught on to how good this San Jose State team became the second half of this season. And very few guys entering the transfer portal. They've lost a tight end and a left tackle, so a little bit of a blow on the offensive side of things. But I think they're still a really good team, and they still have a very good rushing attack. Now, losing a tight end and a tackle, a little bit of a concern because they are a run-based offense. And we'll have to see how Coastal Carolina matches up in this game. Coastal on the season did struggle to stop the run, though. They gave up 5.1 yards per rush away from home this year, which is not a good number. So I do think San Jose State can control the line of scrimmage here. And Coastal Carolina, you know, they've been one of those mid-major programs that's made some noise in recent years, but a very disappointing 7-5 season this year. You got to be careful with the Hawaii Bowl. You know, it's a vacation for some, and I think of the two teams here, especially being an East Coast team, you got to feel like Coastal might treat this as the vacation more than San Jose State. Quarterback Grayson McCall also is transfer portal. Backup Guest is the portal, so it looks like the third-string quarterback, who did take over 200 snaps this year. They had 3 quarterbacks that all played. I think he's going to be the starter here, but they've also lost 4 or 5 other guys to the transfer portal. So you can understand why this line has gone from -7 up to -10, favoring San Jose State.
You can catch Steve's complete work at wagertalk.com. Of course, the NFL, the NBA, college basketball every night, folks. So join Steve right there at wagertalk.com. Steve, tons of bowl games you got us through. We appreciate you stopping by as always.
I enjoyed it, Mark. Thank you very much.